Every human alive today is a walking archive of power that once ruled the world. Not power as flags or crowns, not power as dates in a textbook, power as inheritance. Inside your body are borders that no longer exist. Inside your cells are migrations that were never written down. Inside your DNA are empires that officially ended, but biologically never did. You are not only the product of your parents, you are the product of armies that moved, traders who settled, refugees who survived, and strangers who met under circumstances history barely recorded. Empires didn't just shape the past, they shaped you. But here's the strange part. Most people believe empires die loudly. They imagine fire, collapse, final battles, last emperors staring at burning cities. Rome falls, Egypt fades, the Mongols retreat, the Vikings disappear into myth. End of story. That belief feels comforting, clean, contained, because if empires truly died, then history would be finished with them. But biology tells a very different story, because empires don't die the way stories end. They dissolve, they seep. They move from stone into flesh, and once they do, they become almost impossible to erase. Hold on to this thought. What if the most successful empires in history are the ones we think failed? What if survival was never about monuments, but about reproduction? By the end of this video, you will understand which empires are still alive inside you, how they crossed centuries without leaving capitals behind, and why history never actually disappears. It just changes the material it's written on. When we think about empires, we picture ruins, broken columns half buried in sand, statues without faces, walls cracked by time and weather. We walk through these places quietly, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the dead, and we tell ourselves, this is what remains. But ruins are deceptive. They give the illusion of finality. Stone looks permanent until it collapses. Human bodies look fragile until they outlast civilizations, because stone does not reproduce. People do. Empires were never really about buildings. They were about movement. Movement of soldiers, movement of merchants, movement of families dragged, pushed, or pulled across continents. Every empire, no matter how brutal or refined, relied on the same biological engine, human bodies crossing space and time. For centuries, historians searched for empires where they thought empires should be found: in the ground, in texts, in inscriptions carved by those in power. They reconstructed battles, counted legions, translated royal boasts. They listened carefully to what empires said about themselves, but they missed what empires left behind unintentionally. Not speeches, not laws, children, bloodlines, DNA. The greatest archive of human history was never locked in a library or buried beneath ruins. It was carried forward quietly, generation after generation, inside living people who had no idea what they were preserving. DNA doesn't care about glory. It doesn't remember kings. It doesn't celebrate victories. It doesn't record names. DNA records movement. It records who met whom, who stayed, who mixed, who survived long enough to pass something on. When an army marched into a foreign land, it didn't vanish when the war ended. Soldiers settled. Administrators stayed. Camp followers built families. When borders collapsed, people didn't evaporate. They remained where they were, or moved again. Each movement left a trace, a tiny change copied again and again, quietly passed down through centuries of ordinary lives. Empires didn't plan this legacy. They couldn't control it, but they couldn't stop it either, because biology doesn't obey political collapse. This is where the idea of fallen empires begins to break apart. Take Rome. In textbooks, Rome ends in the year 476 AD. A neat date, a clean conclusion. The Western Empire collapses. The last emperor is deposed. The story moves on. But inside human bodies, Rome never ended. Roman legions were not temporary visitors. They settled across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. They married local women. They raised children who spoke new languages. They blended into populations that would later forget their names. names, not their genes. Modern genetic studies reveal markers linked to Roman-era Italy scattered far beyond Rome's old borders: southern Britain, the Iberian Peninsula, the Balkans, North Africa. The empire didn't fall, it fragmented into millions of lives. Rome didn't become ruins. Rome became people. And Rome is not unique. The Vikings are remembered as raiders, sudden, violent, temporary. Long ships appear, monasteries burn, then the sea swallows them again. That's the image we're given. But DMA tells a quieter, longer story. The Vikings didn't just raid, they stayed in the soil of England's countryside, along the coasts of Ireland and Scotland, across Iceland's once empty land, deep into Eastern Europe and Russia. Entire communities formed from Viking settlers who stopped sailing and started living. Today, millions of people carry Viking ancestry without ever knowing it. No sagas in their families, no longships in their memories, just DNA preserving a history their culture forgot. And this pattern repeats everywhere. Persian blood flowing through South and Central Asia, Mongol DNA stretching across half the planet, Egyptian ancestry traveling far beyond the Nile. Empires reached farther through children than they ever did through conquest. Some empires vanished so completely that history barely remembers them. No written language, no surviving cities, no recorded kings. And yet, they remain. Modern genetic research has uncovered ancient populations that officially disappeared thousands of years ago, still present inside living people today. Entire cultures survive with no names, no symbols, no stories. Their last monument is human flesh. This is uncomfortable because it destroys the idea of purity. It means identity is not clean or isolated or contained. It means none of us belong to one place alone. We are the result of crossings, collisions, survival, love, violence, chance. Every human body is a moving timeline, a layered record of migration written in cells instead of ink. Empires didn't just redraw maps, they rewrote humanity. And the most powerful empire in history has no capital city, no borders, no army, no anthem. It cannot be conquered.
Because it lives quietly inside billions of people, passed from parent to child, copied cell by cell, protected by time itself. Empires do not die, they become human. There is a reason this idea feels unsettling, because once you understand it, history stops being something that happened to other people. It becomes something that happened to you. Not metaphorically, biologically. Every time geneticists map human DNA, the same truth reappears. Humanity is not organized the way history books are. There are no clean lines, no sealed civilizations, no isolated origins. Instead, there is constant motion, waves of people moving, mixing, separating, then mixing again. What we call an empire is often just the loudest moment in a much longer biological process. Empires didn't create movement, they accelerated it, they forced it, they magnified it. When conquest happened, it wasn't just territory that changed hands. Lives did. And those lives carried information forward in a form no collapse could erase. This is why genetic maps don't match political maps. Modern borders tell stories about governments. DNA tells stories about survival. Look closely and you see it everywhere. Southern Europeans carrying traces of North African ancestry from Roman and Islamic expansion. Northern Africans carrying traces of Europe. Central Asians carrying echoes of steppe nomads who never built cities at all. South Asians carrying layers of ancient migrations stacked thousands of years deep. History teaches us that cultures replace one another. Biology shows us something more complex. They stack, they blend, they endure. Even violence leaves a genetic shadow. This is uncomfortable to say, but necessary to understand. Conquest often involved coercion, forced movement, enslavement. Yet even these horrors became part of the biological record. DNA doesn't judge the circumstances. It only records that people existed long enough to pass something on. That survival, under any condition, is what history ultimately remembers. Which means the past is not behind us, it is inside us. Every human body is a living museum with no labels. You carry languages that were never written down. You carry borders that no longer exist. You carry ancestors who never knew their actions would echo this far forward. This also means that the idea of pure identity is an illusion. There is no unmixed lineage, no untouched bloodline, no isolated origin. The farther back you go, the more every family tree turns into a web. We are not descended from one people, we are descended from encounters. This realization changes how power looks. Empires believed they controlled history through laws and monuments, but the only thing that truly lasted was reproduction, not the palace, not the banner, the child. And once that child existed, the empire no longer belonged to itself. It belonged to time. This is why some of the most dominant empires appear to vanish completely, yet leave enormous genetic footprints. The Mongols, for example, left few lasting buildings compared to their reach, but their DNA stretches across continents, not because of architecture, because of movement, because of scale, because human lives multiplied faster than stone could. The same is true for countless unnamed groups history barely noticed. Hunter-gatherers absorbed by farmers, local populations folded into expanding states, communities erased culturally, but preserved biologically. When we say a culture disappeared, what we usually mean is this: its stories stopped being told, but its people did not stop existing. They became someone else, spoke another language, wore different symbols, but inside their cells, the past remained intact, waiting. This is why modern science keeps resurrecting forgotten history, not through myths, through molecules, a single tooth, a fragment of bone, a strand of DNA. Suddenly, a population we thought was gone reappears alive inside modern bodies, not as nostalgia, as fact. And once you see this, the meaning of empire shifts completely. Empire is no longer about domination, it's about diffusion. It's not about how long a state ruled, it's about how deeply it entered the human gene pool. Measured this way, many failed empires were extraordinarily successful. They dissolved into humanity instead of vanishing from it. They stopped ruling, but they never stopped existing. This also means something else, something quieter but profound. You are not separate from history. You are its continuation. Your existence is evidence that countless people survived long enough to pass something on. People who crossed borders they didn't choose. People who adapted when empires collapsed. People who rebuilt lives under new names, new rulers, new maps. Their reward was not recognition, it was continuation. And that continuation is you. When you look at ancient ruins, you are not looking at something that failed. You are looking at something that changed form. Stone fell, bodies endured. Time favors flesh over marble. So the next time you hear that an empire died, remember this: empires don't disappear. They migrate, they fragment, they hide, they wait inside ordinary people who never imagined themselves connected to ancient power. The most powerful empire in history has no capital, no borders, no flag. It has no rulers, and it cannot collapse because it exists wherever humans exist, copied cell by cell, passed hand to hand, breath to breath, generation to generation. Empires do not die, they become human. And once you understand that, history stops feeling distant. The past stops feeling finished, and you realize something quietly astonishing. You are not just studying empires, you are carrying them.